Thank you. So now, Maintenant, on va donc donner la parole à Roxanne, qui est aujourd'hui à l'University of the Arts à Londres. Mais avec Martine, on a eu la chance de rencontrer Roxanne quand elle était responsable de la propriété intellectuelle à la Victoria and Albert Museum à Londres. Et avec cette casquette de gestionnaire de droit, c'était très intéressant de voir que finalement, on l'a déjà vu, il y a beaucoup de nuances dans une politique d'image et qu'on peut aussi bien marier des ouvertures avec une vraie gestion et la problématique de générer des recettes, qui est aujourd'hui vraiment une problématique pour les musées. Donc je donne la parole à Roxanne. Over to you.
Merci, Katie. And just to echo my colleagues and my esteemed colleagues here, just thank you for inviting me to come and speak at this event, and thank you all for coming to listen to me speak. Just to echo, Karen mentioned her love and kind of real kind of passion for metadata in the same way that over my career in cultural heritage and kind of building those bridges and filling those gaps between cultural heritage, the creative industries, and how we can access, engage, and share cultural content. It's really thinking about how rights, and particularly copyright, is really vital to enable that access. And I think I've spent a lot of my career really trying to demystify a very technical legal subject and make it meaningful to the institutions that I've had the privilege of working with, building relationships with artists and designers that we represent, and really importantly, making sure that when we share and access content, that it's presented in a way that's meaningful for our audiences and users. So what I'm going to talk about over the next few minutes is very much just to give you a bit of an insight into how important I believe it is having not only experienced and managed a rights strategy within my time at the V&A, but really kind of looking at how important a rights strategy is to being able for institutions to be able to open and engage with the collections. Thinking about what a cultural institution might need to consider. So in order to be able to share online or engage in the community or work with others across the creative industries, what internal kind of considerations might an institution need to think about? And then giving you a bit of an insight into what I think a successful rights strategy looks like. I'm not going to go into any kind of legal detail about copyright, but I think it's important to just reinforce that within cultural heritage, the main area of intellectual property that is important to bear in mind for the collections is copyright. So it's creations of the mind, which includes artistic, literary, films, broadcasts, recordings, anything that's created and fixed and expressed in some way. And it's not designed to last forever. So in most countries, it lasts life of the creator plus 70 years. And really just to emphasize in this context that it's designed to balance the interests of creatives to be fairly rewarded and recognized for what they've created, but also the interests of society and the impact and influence that creatives have on society. And it should be viewed within the cultural heritage context as a way for enabling that cultural, creative and educational exchange where possible. And what I mean by where possible, I think for a cultural institution to help achieve some of its kind of goals, it's often copyright's not being managed in isolation. So, for example, within certain collections, it's also thinking about potentially data protection, privacy law. There could be other agreements in place within contracts, and and also thinking, as we heard yesterday, about cultural heritage laws, and also thinking about freedom of expression, why a work was created in the first place. And I think, in my experience, again, it's often when you're managing a collection and looking at how to make it accessible, it's also thinking about why a work was created in the first place, and it's not always with commercial intent when it comes to copyright and the reasons potentially not to make it available. So I think Karen's just explained this very neatly with the amazing work that's been achieved at the National Museum. Why am I even here talking about a rights strategy? A few years ago, I had that challenge within my own organisation, and really thinking about why now? I mean, it's always arguably been important, but I think having, again, experienced the transition from analogue to digital, we're living in very exciting times where, with emerging technologies, there's new ways to create, curate, contextualise, collaborate, engage, inspire, educate, amongst many other things. And I believe that without having a right strategy in place, these kind of potential ways to connect could arguably be compromised if you don't understand what the rights are and what you can do with them. And that doesn't always mean restricting access, but it's about understanding what you can do once you understand what the rights are in different collections. So just thinking about some of the things when thinking about why a right strategy is important, I think it really, the title of this session is looking at open being at the heart of the museum. And I think to kind of embed rights, and I've had to do this and explain to different colleagues how important copyright management is to each and every individual, whether they're working in exhibitions, whether it's research, whether it's learning, whether it's outreach, whether it's digital. It's going to come into play in all areas of museums' activities. And I think having a strategy in place will help ensure that there's no conflict of interests and that any decision-making is aligned and is consistent. So if you're thinking about cultural institutions, right from the point of acquiring a work and managing that work, whether it's then loaned or exhibited or promoted in social media, or it's a project that's done in collaboration with someone else, it's really that it lies at the core of making these things happen. I think, I'm not going to talk about this too much, but I think importantly, lots of cultural institutions, particularly working in the UK, are increasingly having cuts in funding. So they're having to think about how to be more creative with limited resources and budgets, but also thinking about how to kind of share and celebrate the collections in new ways. And so a lot of institutions also have a commercial remit to generate ongoing revenue, which is then fed directly back into large digitization projects, for example, which will then in turn enable more access to everyone online. Many institutions are also creators of their own intellectual property, so it's also, again, with the right strategy, thinking about all the different rights holders that might be involved. And then it's also essential to understand, if you've got a collection, there may be within your legacy collection pre-existing agreements. So if a policy changes within the organisation, it's really important to make sure that these pre-existing agreements are taken into account. It's also potentially an opportunity as things are shifting and there's a general sense of becoming more open. It's looking at opportunities to renegotiate and revalue these old agreements, and having that knowledge to be able to have those conversations is really important. Having a right strategy is also essential to be able to identify when works are in the public domain and where rights holders are unknown. I think there could be, without having a clear strategy, there could be in danger of pockets of collections unfairly, if you like, not being made visible because people don't really understand whether the rights have expired or not, or they're not going to prioritise that collection because it seems too complex. So it's really important to have something in place to start to break down some of these challenges. And just to say as well that cultural institutions are trusted sources. They are the authoritative source. They have a responsibility to maintain and look after the kind of reputation and authenticity of the original works. So it's important that in practice they also respect the creators' rights of the works that they represent. And I think really importantly, it's being able to understand the law. And as I said at the beginning, it's coming at this from a sort of non-legal perspective and being able to apply that law on a day-to-day basis in practice. Gone quickly. So these are some of the challenges that institutions will face, and we've kind of touched upon this already. Everything from identifying your resources, managing cultural change within an institution, competing with other priorities within an organisation, understanding what peer organisations are doing. So if the public are able to access something free here, they might want to know why they can't access it free at this other institution. So it's making sure you're aligned in your thinking and as much as possible. And Karen touched on this before. I think one of the key challenges with rights management is legacy data and having a sufficient infrastructure to support the works, the data, the metadata, the images, knowing what you've got and knowing how to make it accessible. So what a good strategy looks like is having buy-in from decision makers and good governance, flexible policies and procedures. Things will evolve, and having a strategy in place will help save time, be more aware and understanding of the sense of the landscape you're working in. Importantly, having staff awareness and training. Peer networks and sharing best practice is essential. But importantly, always keeping your users at the centre. It would be detrimental to make ill decisions when actually it's not benefiting the audiences that you're trying to reach. And so some of the benefits are digital access to the collections, where possible, open access to the collections, and then having clean data to help with being visible on multiple platforms. The cleaner the rights data is, and it's clear what you can do with that content, any opportunities that you have will make it a lot easier for you to be able to engage and benefit from these different platforms. And then I've also touched upon already the commercial opportunities that institutions also are responsible for. Just some here. And then other areas as a result of having a good rights strategy. So not focusing on image licensing or image access as such, but I think having a good understanding of rights, negotiation, collaboration, building relationships with peer organisations, others in education and creative industries. This is an example which was actually to tie in with the V&A's Balenciaga exhibition 2 years ago, working closely with London College of Fashion and also Balenciaga. And the idea here was for the students as part of their course to create copies of the Balenciaga originals in a kind of mock format to look at new ways to learn about how the garments are constructed. And those were then used in the exhibition alongside the originals. So anyone coming to the physical space could benefit from these new collaborations and ways of really interpreting the collections. All of these things involve license agreements, including the ownership of intellectual property. And in the same way, accompanying the Balenciaga exhibition, and you can still see these images online, but I think just to look at how people are starting to use technology to kind of reveal and dig deeper into collections and kind of see it in a way that they might not have been able to before are these beautiful forensic X-ray photographs that, again, Nick Vasey, the photographer, worked alongside the V&A. They were used in the exhibition. They're available online. And he's been very open in the way that this content is shared. And then just one last example is, again, using these opportunities and this synergy between art and technology, and using 3D printing for museum outreach. In this example, colleagues went into a hospital where patients were able to rebuild, remix, reinterpret the sculpture collections using CAD design and new 3D printing techniques. So I'm going to end soon. But just to say, having a right strategy will help cultural institutions be relevant, be inclusive, be transparent, be realistic, and be risk aware. It will make researching and sourcing relevant content easier, build relationships with artists and others to secure more open access to artworks, reinforce the importance of managing rights effectively, organisation-wide and outside the walls, and most importantly, ensure the law is respected but does not compromise cultural, educational and creative exchange. Thank you very much.
Merci Roxane. Donc on va faire comme pour les sessions précédentes, poser les questions à la